Flight 447 from New York to Los Angeles was supposed to be just another routine trip. The plane was full of business travelers, families on vacation, and people heading home. But one passenger interaction would turn this ordinary flight into something that no one on board would ever forget. A wealthy family in first class began making cruel comments about one of the black flight attendants, treating her with disrespect and making her job difficult in front of other passengers. They thought their money gave them the right to humiliate someone they saw as beneath them. The flight attendant stayed professional, despite their behavior, but when the situation got worse and other passengers became uncomfortable, she made a decision that shocked everyone on the plane. What happened next would change this wealthy family forever and teach everyone on board a lesson about respect and humanity that they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. If you're someone who appreciates emotional stories, we'd love for you to like and subscribe. There's more to come that might move you too. Flight 447 from New York to Los Angeles was scheduled to depart at 10:15 a.m. on a busy Tuesday morning. The Boeing 777 was completely full, with 285 passengers settling into their seats for the 5.5-hour journey across the country. In first class, row 2, the Whitman family had claimed their premium seats with the air of people who were used to the best of everything. Richard Whitman, a 48-year-old real estate mogul worth over $50 million, sat in the aisle seat checking emails on his phone. His wife, Patricia, 44, was already complaining about the temperature while arranging her expensive handbag and designer jacket. Their teenage daughter, Madison, 17, was taking selfies and posting them on social media with captions about flying first class again. The Whitmans were the kind of wealthy family who believed their money made them superior to everyone around them. They spoke loudly about their expensive purchases, name-dropped exclusive restaurants and clubs, and treated service workers like they were invisible unless they needed something. The flight crew was preparing for departure when the lead flight attendant, Jasmine Washington, approached the first-class cabin to check on passengers and ensure everyone was ready for takeoff. Jasmine was a 34-year-old woman who had been working for the airline for 8 years. She was professional, experienced, and took pride in providing excellent service to all passengers, regardless of their ticket class or attitude. Jasmine was also black, something that the Whitman family noticed immediately when she approached their row. "Good morning," Jasmine said with a warm smile. "I'm Jasmine, your lead flight attendant today. Is there anything I can get you before we take off?" Richard Whitman looked up from his phone and gave Jasmine a dismissive glance. "We're fine. Just make sure the service is up to first-class standards." There was something in his tone that made it clear he was already questioning whether Jasmine was capable of providing the level of service he expected. "Of course, sir," Jasmine replied professionally. "I'll make sure you have everything you need for a comfortable flight." As Jasmine moved on to check with other passengers, Patricia Whitman leaned over to her husband and spoke in a voice that was just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I hope she's more competent than she looks," Patricia said. "You know how it is with these affirmative action hires." Jasmine heard the comment, but kept her professional demeanor, continuing to prepare the cabin for departure. She had unfortunately encountered passengers like the Whitmans before, and she had learned that the best approach was to provide excellent service and not give them any reason to complain. During takeoff, everything proceeded normally. The Whitmans settled into their seats and seemed to be enjoying the premium amenities of first class. But as soon as the plane reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign was turned off, their behavior toward Jasmine began to escalate. "Excuse me," Richard called out when Jasmine was serving drinks to other passengers. "I ordered a scotch on the rocks, not this watered-down garbage." Jasmine approached his seat with a fresh drink. "I'm sorry, sir. Let me get you a new one, with more ice." "More ice?" Richard said loudly. "I said rocks, not a swimming pool. Don't you people understand English?" The phrase "you people" hung in the air, and several passengers in nearby seats turned to look at the confrontation. Jasmine felt the familiar sting of racism, but she maintained her professional composure. "Of course, sir. I'll prepare exactly what you'd like," Jasmine said calmly. As Jasmine went to fix Richard's drink, Patricia decided to join in the harassment. "Madison, look at this," Patricia said to her daughter, holding up the airline magazine. "It says here that this airline is committed to diversity and inclusion. I guess that explains why the service quality has gone downhill." Madison giggled at her mother's comment, and both women looked directly at Jasmine as she returned with Richard's new drink. "Here you are, sir," Jasmine said, placing the scotch on Richard's tray table. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" "Actually, yes," Patricia said with a condescending smile. "Could you send over one of the other flight attendants? Someone with more experience?" "I have 8 years of experience with this airline, ma'am," Jasmine replied politely. "I'd be happy to help you with whatever you need." 8 years? Richard laughed. "Doing what? Serving coffee? We're used to a higher level of service than what you're probably capable of providing." Other passengers were starting to notice the Whitmans' behavior, and many of them looked uncomfortable with the obvious racism and classism being displayed. A businessman in the row behind them shook his head in disgust, and an elderly woman across the aisle was staring at the family with disapproval. But the Whitmans seemed to be enjoying the attention and the opportunity to assert their perceived superiority over Jasmine. "Look," Patricia said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a $100 bill. "Here's a tip. Maybe this will motivate you to actually do your job properly." She held the money out to Jasmine like she was feeding a dog a treat. Jasmine looked at the money but didn't take it. "That's very generous, ma'am, but I'm just here to make sure you have a safe and comfortable flight." "Safe?" Madison chimed in, speaking for the first time. "Are you even qualified to handle safety procedures? This doesn't exactly seem like a job that requires much skill." The comment was designed to be insulting, and it succeeded. Jasmine felt her patience wearing thin, but she knew that losing her professional demeanor would only make the situation worse. "I'm fully trained in all safety procedures, miss," Jasmine said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on the other passengers." As Jasmine walked away, the Whitmans continued their commentary. "I can't believe the airline puts people like that in charge of first class," Richard said loudly. "We pay premium prices for premium service." "Maybe we should ask to speak to the captain," Patricia suggested. "I'm sure he'd want to know about the quality of staff he's working with." "Good idea," Richard agreed. "Someone needs to teach these people their place." Jasmine overheard their conversation as she helped other passengers, and she felt a familiar mix of anger and sadness. She had worked hard to build her career in the airline industry, had excellent performance reviews, and genuinely loved helping passengers have positive travel experiences. But families like the Whitmans made her job difficult and emotionally draining. What made the situation even worse was that other passengers were witnessing the harassment, and Jasmine could see the discomfort and embarrassment on their faces. Some passengers looked like they wanted to say something to defend her, but nobody wanted to get involved in a confrontation at 30,000 feet. As the flight continued, the Whitmans found new ways to demean and insult Jasmine. They criticized the temperature of their food, complained about the timing of drink service, and made loud comments about hiring standards whenever Jasmine was within earshot. The breaking point came when Richard decided to escalate his behavior even further. "Jasmine," Richard called out during the meal service, "this food is cold. I want you to take it back to the kitchen and heat it up properly." Jasmine checked the meal and found that it was actually at the correct temperature. "The meal appears to be fine, sir," Jasmine said, "but I'd be happy to see if the galley can warm it up a bit more." "Don't argue with me," Richard said aggressively. "I'm telling you the food is cold and I want it fixed. Or do I need to explain the concept of customer service to you?" At this point, several passengers were openly staring at the confrontation. A man in business class had even stood up to see what was happening in first class. Jasmine realized that the situation was becoming disruptive to other passengers and potentially dangerous. The Whitmans were creating a hostile environment that could escalate into something more serious if not addressed. She made a decision that would change the entire atmosphere of the flight. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jasmine said, walking to the front of the first-class cabin where the intercom microphone was located, "I need to make an announcement." Richard looked surprised and slightly nervous. He hadn't expected Jasmine to do anything other than continue accepting his abuse. "What are you doing?" Patricia demanded. Jasmine picked up the microphone and her voice filled the entire aircraft. What she said next would shock everyone on board and teach the Whitman family a lesson they would never forget. The cabin fell silent as Jasmine's voice came through the speakers throughout the entire aircraft. Passengers in economy, business class, and first class all stopped their conversations to listen to what their flight attendant was about to say. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jasmine Washington, your lead flight attendant speaking," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I want to take a moment to address something that's happening on our flight today." Richard Whitman's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. He had not expected Jasmine to make their confrontation public, and he could feel the eyes of other passengers turning toward him. "What do you think you're doing?" Patricia hissed at Jasmine, but Jasmine continued speaking into the microphone. "For the past hour, I've been experiencing harassment from passengers who seem to believe that their ticket price gives them the right to treat me with disrespect and racism," Jasmine said, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "I want everyone on this flight to understand something important." The plane was completely quiet now. Even the flight crew in the galley had stopped their work to listen to Jasmine's announcement. "My name is Jasmine Washington. I have a bachelor's degree in hospitality management from Howard University. I've been working in the airline industry for 8 years, during which time I've completed over 2,000 flights safely. I'm trained in CPR, first aid, emergency evacuation procedures, and crisis management. I speak 3 languages fluently, and I've received commendations from my airline for excellence in customer service. Several passengers began nodding in approval, and Jasmine could see people in the economy section turning in their seats to get a better look at what was happening in first class. More importantly, Jasmine continued, I'm a human being who deserves to be treated with basic respect and dignity, regardless of my race, my job, or how much money you paid for your seat. Richard stood up from his seat, his face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. You can't use the airline's equipment to make personal announcements. But Jasmine wasn't finished. The passengers who have been harassing me seem to believe that their wealth makes them superior to me and gives them the right to make racist comments and treat me like their personal servant, Jasmine said. I want everyone on this flight to know that money cannot buy class respect or basic human decency. A passenger in economy class began clapping, and the applause quickly spread throughout the cabin. People were standing up to show their support for Jasmine, and many were looking toward the first class section with obvious disapproval for the Whitman family. Furthermore, Jasmine continued, her voice growing stronger, I want to remind everyone that we are all sharing this aircraft together. We are all human beings trying to reach our destination safely. The color of my skin, the uniform I wear, and the job I perform do not make me any less deserving of respect than any passenger on this plane. Madison Whitman was now slouching in her seat, clearly embarrassed by the attention her family was receiving. She had not expected her parents' behavior to be called out so publicly, and she could see other passengers her age shaking their heads in disapproval. To the passengers who have been making inappropriate comments, Jasmine said, looking directly at the Whitman family, I want you to know that your behavior is unacceptable, hurtful, and reflects poorly on your character. I hope you will take this opportunity to reflect on how you treat other people. The applause from other passengers grew louder, and someone in business class shouted, You tell them, Jasmine. Richard was furious and humiliated. He had never been called out publicly for his behavior, and he wasn't used to being challenged by someone he considered beneath his social status. This is completely unprofessional, Richard shouted. I'm going to report you to your supervisor and have you fired. Jasmine finally put down the microphone and walked back to the Whitman family's row. Sir, Jasmine said calmly, you're welcome to file any complaint you'd like when we land. But right now I need you to sit down, lower your voice, and stop disrupting the flight for other passengers. Don't you dare tell me what to do, Richard said, standing up and pointing his finger aggressively at Jasmine. Do you know who I am? I own half the real estate in Manhattan. I don't care if you own the moon, a voice called out from economy class. Sit down and leave her alone. Other passengers began expressing their support for Jasmine and their disapproval of Richard's behavior. She's just doing her job. Leave the woman alone. Your money doesn't give you the right to be racist. Richard looked around the cabin and realized that every passenger on the plane was against him. His wife and daughter were slouching in their seats, clearly mortified by the public humiliation. Captain Johnson's voice came over the intercom from the cockpit. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to remind everyone that federal law prohibits harassment of flight crew members. Any passenger who continues to engage in disruptive behavior will be met by law enforcement when we land in Los Angeles. The captain's announcement made it clear that Richard's behavior could have legal consequences, which finally seemed to get his attention. Fine, Richard said, sitting back down in his seat, but this isn't over. Jasmine returned to her duties, and the other passengers continued to show their support throughout the flight. People thanked her as she passed their seats, and several passengers made sure to tell her how professionally she had handled the situation. The Whitman family spent the rest of the flight in sullen silence, clearly embarrassed by their public humiliation and the universal disapproval of their behavior. But the story was far from over. About 3 hours into the flight, as passengers were settling in for the long journey across the country, Richard Whitman suddenly stood up from his seat, grabbed his chest, and collapsed into the aisle. Patricia screamed, and Madison jumped up from her seat in panic. Help! Someone help! Patricia shouted. My husband is having a heart attack. Jasmine immediately rushed to Richard's side and found him unconscious and barely breathing. His face was grey, and his pulse was weak and irregular. Is there a doctor on board? Jasmine called out over the intercom. We have a medical emergency in first class. The cabin erupted in concerned voices as passengers turned to see what was happening. Jasmine began performing CPR while calling for the medical kit and oxygen equipment. Please, someone help him, Patricia begged, tears streaming down her face. He has a heart condition, but he forgot to take his medication this morning. Madison was crying and holding her mother's hand as they watched Jasmine work to save Richard's life. Then, from the back of the plane, a calm voice called out, I'm a doctor. "Let me through." Passengers moved aside as a tall, distinguished black man in his 60s made his way quickly toward the first-class cabin. He was carrying a medical bag and moved with the confidence of someone who had handled many emergency situations. As he reached Richard's unconscious form, Jasmine looked up and felt a wave of emotion wash over her. "Dad?" she said in surprise. Dr. Marcus Washington knelt down next to his daughter and immediately began assessing Richard's condition. "Hello, sweetheart," Dr. Washington said calmly as he checked Richard's vital signs. "Looks like we have some work to do." The Whitman family stared in shock as they realized that the black doctor who was trying to save Richard's life was the father of the flight attendant they had been harassing for hours. Dr. Washington was one of the most respected cardiologists in New York City, with over 30 years of experience saving lives. And now the life he was trying to save belonged to a man who had spent the day treating his daughter with racist contempt. The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone in the first-class cabin, especially Patricia and Madison Whitman, who watched in amazement as the man they had dismissed based on his race worked expertly to save their husband and father. Dr. Marcus Washington worked quickly and efficiently as Richard Whitman lay unconscious on the narrow airplane aisle. The distinguished cardiologist had handled countless medical emergencies during his 30-year career, but never one involving a patient who had just spent hours racially harassing his daughter. "Jasmine, I need you to get me the AED from the medical kit," Dr. Washington said calmly, his professional training taking over despite the personal nature of the situation, and asked the captain to contact medical control for landing instructions. Jasmine quickly retrieved the automated external defibrillator, while other flight attendants cleared passengers away from the area and contacted the cockpit. Patricia and Madison Whitman stood nearby, watching in shock and fear as the black doctor they had earlier dismissed worked to save Richard's life. Dr. Washington checked Richard's pulse and found it was dangerously irregular. "He's in cardiac arrhythmia," he explained to Jasmine as he prepared the defibrillator. "His heart isn't beating properly." "Is he going to be okay?" Patricia asked tearfully, her voice shaking with fear and desperation. Dr. Washington looked up at her with calm, professional compassion. "I'm going to do everything I can to help him, but we need to get him to a hospital as soon as possible." As Dr. Washington worked, other passengers watched the scene unfold with a mixture of concern for Richard's health and amazement at the irony of the situation. The man who had spent hours demeaning Jasmine and making racist comments was now completely dependent on her and her father for his life. "Clear!" Dr. Washington called out as he prepared to use the defibrillator. Everyone step back. The electrical shock jolted Richard's body, and Dr. Washington immediately checked his pulse again. After a few tense seconds, Richard's heartbeat began to stabilize. "There we go," Dr. Washington said with quiet satisfaction. "His rhythm is improving." Richard's eyes fluttered open, and he looked around in confusion at the faces staring down at him. He was lying on the airplane floor with an oxygen mask over his face, and his chest was connected to medical equipment. "What happened?" Richard mumbled weakly. "You had a cardiac episode," Dr. Washington explained, continuing to monitor Richard's vital signs. "Your heart went into an irregular rhythm, but we've got it stabilized now." Richard tried to sit up, but Dr. Washington gently pushed him back down. "Stay still," Dr. Washington instructed. "We need to keep you calm and monitor your heart until we can get you to a hospital." As Richard's vision cleared, he began to recognize the people around him. He saw his wife and daughter, both crying with relief. He saw Jasmine, the flight attendant he had been harassing, kneeling beside him with concern on her face. And he saw the black man in a business suit who was clearly the doctor treating him. "Oh, you're the doctor?" Richard asked weakly, his voice filled with confusion and disbelief. "Dr. Marcus Washington," the older man replied professionally. "I'm a cardiologist at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York." Richard's eyes moved from Dr. Washington to Jasmine, and understanding slowly dawned on his face. "She's your daughter," Richard said, more as a statement than a question. "Yes, she is," Dr. Washington replied, his voice carrying just a hint of pride. "And she's been taking excellent care of you during this emergency." The full weight of the situation hit Richard like a physical blow. The flight attendant he had spent hours treating with racist contempt was the daughter of the doctor who had just saved his life. The unqualified woman he had dismissed was part of a family with more education and professional accomplishment than he had bothered to recognize. Captain Johnson's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for an emergency medical landing in Denver. We'll be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. Dr. Washington continued to monitor Richard's condition while explaining to Patricia what had happened and what to expect when they reached the hospital. "Your husband has a serious heart condition that requires immediate treatment," Dr. Washington explained. "The episode he experienced today could have been fatal if not treated quickly." "Thank you," Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for saving his life." Dr. Washington nodded professionally, but Patricia could see the restraint in his eyes. She realized that he was being gracious and compassionate toward a family that had spent hours treating his daughter with disrespect and racism. Madison, who had been quiet since her father's collapse, finally spoke up. "Dr. Washington," she said hesitantly, "I want to apologize for what we said earlier, about Jasmine, about everything." Dr. Washington looked at the teenager with kindness, but also with the wisdom of someone who had encountered prejudice many times throughout his life. "Apologies are important, young lady," Dr. Washington said, "but what matters more is what you learn from this experience and how you treat people in the future." As the plane began its descent toward Denver, Dr. Washington continued to monitor Richard's vital signs, while Jasmine coordinated with the medical team that would be waiting on the ground. Richard, who was now fully conscious but still weak, watched Jasmine work with professional efficiency to ensure his safe transfer to the hospital. She spoke with the paramedics via radio, gathered his medical information from Patricia, and coordinated with the flight crew to ensure the emergency landing went smoothly. "Jasmine," Richard said quietly, motioning for her to come closer. Jasmine approached hesitantly, not sure what to expect from the man who had spent hours demeaning her. "I'm sorry," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper, "for everything I said, for how I treated you. You didn't deserve that." Jasmine looked at Richard with a mixture of surprise and cautious acceptance. "Thank you for saying that," Jasmine replied. "I hope you're going to be okay." "I don't understand," Richard said, struggling to comprehend what had happened. "Why did you help me, after how badly I treated you?" Jasmine glanced at her father, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Because it's my job to take care of all passengers," Jasmine said simply, "and because it's the right thing to do." Dr. Washington smiled with pride at his daughter's response. He had raised her to treat all people with dignity and compassion, regardless of how they treated her. As the plane touched down in Denver, emergency medical personnel rushed aboard to transfer Richard to the hospital. Dr. Washington briefed the paramedics on Richard's condition and the treatment he had provided during the flight. "Doctor, will you be accompanying the patient to the hospital?" one of the paramedics asked. Dr. Washington looked at Patricia and Madison, who were preparing to follow the ambulance to the hospital. "If the family would like me to continue providing care, I'd be happy to consult with the emergency room physicians," Dr. Washington offered. Patricia grabbed Dr. Washington's hand with both of hers. "Please," she begged, "I trust you completely. You saved his life." As Richard was loaded onto a stretcher and wheeled off the plane, he made eye contact with Jasmine one more time. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. Jasmine nodded and watched as the medical team took Richard away, hoping that this experience would change him for the better. The other passengers on the flight gave Dr. Washington and Jasmine a standing ovation as they prepared to continue their journey to Los Angeles. Many passengers approached them to express their admiration for how they had handled both the racist harassment and the medical emergency. "Your daughter is remarkable," an elderly passenger told Dr. Washington. "You should be very proud of her." "I am," Dr. Washington replied, putting his arm around Jasmine. "I've always been proud of the woman she's become." As the plane prepared for takeoff again, Jasmine reflected on the events of the day. She had started the flight facing racism and harassment from passengers who thought they were better than her. But she had ended it by helping to save the life of one of those same passengers with the help of her father, whose medical expertise and compassion had turned a potentially tragic situation into a powerful lesson about human dignity and worth. The Whitman family would spend the next several days in Denver while Richard recovered from his heart attack. And during that time, they would have plenty of opportunity to think about the lesson they had learned at 30,000 feet about respect, prejudice, and the true measure of a person's value. 3 days after the emergency landing in Denver, Richard Whitman was sitting in a hospital bed at Denver General, connected to heart monitors and recovering from what doctors had confirmed was a serious cardiac episode. The cardiologist at the hospital had told him that without the immediate intervention he received on the airplane, he might not have survived. Dr. Marcus Washington had stayed in Denver to consult on Richard's case, working closely with the hospital's cardiac team to ensure the best possible treatment. His expertise and the detailed notes he had taken during the flight emergency had been crucial in developing Richard's treatment plan. Patricia and Madison had spent the past 3 days at Richard's bedside, and the experience had given them time to reflect on their behavior during the flight. The reality of how close they had come to losing Richard, combined with the grace and professionalism shown by Jasmine and Dr. Washington, had forced them to confront some uncomfortable truths about themselves. On Wednesday afternoon, Patricia was sitting beside Richard's bed when Dr. Washington entered the room for his daily checkup. Richard was awake and looking much stronger than he had 3 days earlier. "Good afternoon, Mr. Whitman," Dr. Washington said professionally, reviewing the chart at the foot of the bed. "How are you feeling today?" "Much better, thanks to you," Richard replied quietly. "The nurses tell me you've been overseeing my care personally, even though you're not officially my doctor here." Dr. Washington nodded. "I wanted to make sure you received the best possible treatment. Your case was quite serious." Patricia stood up from her chair and looked at Dr. Washington with an expression of deep gratitude mixed with shame. "Dr. Washington," Patricia said, her voice trembling, "I need to say something to you. What we did on that airplane was inexcusable. The way we treated your daughter, the things we said, I'm ashamed of our behavior." Dr. Washington studied Patricia's face, looking for signs of sincerity in her apology. "Mrs. Whitman," Dr. Washington said calmly, "I appreciate your apology, but the person you really need to speak with is Jasmine." "Where is she?" Madison asked, speaking up from her corner chair where she had been quietly reading. "Is she still in Denver?" "She continued on to Los Angeles for her scheduled flights," Dr. Washington explained, "but she's been asking about your father's condition every day." Richard looked surprised. "She's been checking on me, after how I treated her." "That's the kind of person my daughter is," Dr. Washington said with quiet pride. "She cares about people, even when they don't treat her well." Over the next hour, Dr. Washington explained Richard's condition and treatment plan in detail. Richard had suffered from a condition called atrial fibrillation, which had been triggered by stress, dehydration, and missing his heart medication that morning. With proper treatment and lifestyle changes, he could expect to make a full recovery. "Dr. Washington," Richard said as the consultation was ending, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "How do you do it?" Richard asked. "How do you treat someone with such professionalism and kindness after they've been racist toward your daughter?" Dr. Washington was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Mr. Whitman, I've been dealing with racism my entire life," Dr. Washington said. "When I was in medical school in the 1970s, I was often the only black student in my classes. Patients sometimes refused to let me treat them. Colleagues questioned my qualifications, but I learned that responding to hatred with hatred only creates more pain." Patricia was listening intently, tears forming in her eyes as she realized the challenges Dr. Washington had faced throughout his career. "I chose to become a doctor to help people," Dr. Washington continued. "All people, regardless of their race, their beliefs, or how they treat me. When I saw you having a heart attack on that airplane, I didn't see the man who had been cruel to my daughter. I saw a human being who needed medical help." Richard stared at Dr. Washington with amazement and growing respect. "But how do you teach your children to handle that kind of treatment?" Madison asked quietly. "How did Jasmine stay so calm when we were being so awful to her?" Dr. Washington smiled, thinking about his daughter's strength and character. "I taught Jasmine that her worth as a person doesn't depend on what other people think of her," Dr. Washington explained. "I taught her that treating others with dignity and respect is always the right choice, even when it's difficult. And I taught her that education, hard work, and good character are the best responses to prejudice." "We never gave her a chance," Patricia said, more to herself than to anyone else. "We looked at her uniform and her race, and decided she wasn't capable or intelligent. We never bothered to see her as a person." "That's a choice you made," Dr. Washington said directly but without harshness, "and it's a choice you can make differently in the future." The conversation was interrupted when Richard's nurse entered the room to check his vital signs and administer medication. As the nurse worked, Dr. Washington prepared to leave for his evening rounds. "Dr. Washington," Richard called out as the older man reached the door. "Is there any way we could speak with Jasmine? I'd like to apologize to her properly." Dr. Washington paused and considered the request. "I'll ask her if she's willing to take a phone call," Dr. Washington said. "But I want you to understand something. Jasmine doesn't owe you forgiveness, and she doesn't need your apology to validate her worth as a person." "I understand," Richard said. "I just need her to know that I recognize how wrong I was." That evening, Dr. Washington called Jasmine at her hotel in Los Angeles, where she was preparing for her next flight assignment. "How's he doing, Dad?" Jasmine asked, after hearing about Richard's improving condition. "He's going to make a full recovery," Dr. Washington replied. "But more importantly, I think this experience has changed him and his family. They want to apologize to you properly." Jasmine was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Do you think they're sincere?" Jasmine asked. "I think they are," Dr. Washington said. "But the decision about whether to speak with them is entirely yours." Jasmine thought about the flight, the harassment she had endured, and the medical emergency that had followed. She also thought about her father's example of treating all people with compassion and dignity. "Okay," Jasmine said finally. "I'll talk to them." The next morning, Dr. Washington arranged for a video call between Jasmine and the Whitman family in Richard's hospital room. When Jasmine's face appeared on the tablet screen, the Whitmans could see that she was in her hotel room, still wearing her airline uniform from her previous flight. "Hello, Jasmine," Richard said, his voice much weaker than it had been on the airplane but filled with genuine remorse. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us." "Hello, Mr. Whitman," Jasmine replied professionally. "I'm glad to see you're recovering well." "Jasmine," Patricia said, leaning into the camera view, "I want to apologize to you from the bottom of my heart. The way we treated you was cruel, ignorant, and completely unacceptable. We judged you based on your race and your job, and we were completely wrong." Madison appeared in the camera frame as well. "I'm sorry too," she said, tears in her eyes. "I've never seen my parents behave like that before, and I was embarrassed and ashamed. You didn't deserve any of what we said or did." Jasmine listened to their apologies with the same professional composure she had maintained throughout the flight. "I appreciate your apologies," Jasmine said. "I hope this experience has taught you something about how your words and actions affect other people." "It has," Richard said earnestly. "Your father saved my life, and you provided excellent care during my emergency, despite how terribly we had treated you. I'll never forget that lesson about character and professionalism." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with the Whitman family asking Jasmine about her background, her education, and her career. They learned that she spoke 4 languages, had a master's degree in hospitality management, and was studying for her pilot's license in her spare time. "You're remarkable," Patricia said with genuine admiration, "and we were too prejudiced and ignorant to see it." After the call ended, the Whitman family sat in Richard's hospital room, reflecting on everything they had learned. "I feel like I've been living my whole life with blinders on," Madison said. "How many other people have we judged unfairly because of their race or their jobs?" "Too many," Richard admitted, "but we can do better going forward." When Richard was discharged from the hospital 2 days later, the Whitman family made a decision that would demonstrate their commitment to change. They established a scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in aviation and hospitality, specifically focused on supporting underrepresented minorities in these fields. They named it the Jasmine Washington Scholarship Fund, and they made Dr. Washington the chairman of the selection committee. "We can't undo what we said and did," Patricia explained to Dr. Washington when they presented the idea to him. "But we can try to make sure other young people like Jasmine have opportunities to succeed and be recognized for their talents." Dr. Washington was moved by the gesture and agreed to help administer the scholarship fund. The experience had transformed the Whitman family's understanding of prejudice, privilege, and the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. And for Jasmine and Dr. Washington, it had been a powerful reminder that even the most difficult situations could become opportunities for education and positive change. 1 year after the incident on Flight 447, Jasmine Washington stood at the podium of a conference room in the Denver Convention Center, addressing an audience of airline industry professionals, diversity advocates, and scholarship recipients. She was wearing her captain's uniform. She had completed her pilot training and was now flying commercial aircraft for a major airline. The event was the first annual Jasmine Washington Scholarship Fund Awards ceremony, where 20 young people from underrepresented communities were receiving financial support to pursue careers in aviation and hospitality. In the front row of the audience sat the Whitman family, Richard, Patricia, and Madison, who had traveled from New York to attend the ceremony. Richard looked healthy and strong, having made a full recovery from his cardiac episode and committed to better health habits and stress management. Dr. Marcus Washington sat beside them, now serving as the permanent chairman of the Scholarship Fund Selection Committee. Over the past year, he had become an unlikely friend to the Whitman family, helping them understand the deeper issues of systemic racism and privilege while they worked together to create positive change. "When I first started working as a flight attendant 8 years ago," Jasmine began her speech, "I never imagined that one difficult flight would lead to something so meaningful and positive." She looked out at the audience of scholarship recipients, young people from diverse backgrounds who were pursuing their dreams in industries that had historically lacked diversity. "A year ago, I experienced racism and harassment from passengers who judged me based on my appearance rather than my character or qualifications," Jasmine continued. "It was painful and demoralizing, but it also became an opportunity for education and growth." Richard shifted in his seat, still feeling the weight of his past behavior, but also proud of the positive changes it had ultimately created. "The passengers who treated me poorly that day learned something important about human dignity and respect," Jasmine said. "But more importantly, they chose to turn their mistake into something that could help others." Jasmine gestured toward the scholarship recipients in the audience. These 20 young people represent the future of our industries, she said. They bring diverse perspectives, fresh ideas, and the determination to excel despite any obstacles they may face. After her speech, Jasmine introduced each scholarship recipient, sharing their stories and aspirations. There was Maria Santos, a young Latina woman who wanted to become an airline pilot. James Wilson, a black teenager from inner-city Detroit who dreamed of managing major hotels. Sarah Kim, a Korean-American student pursuing aerospace engineering. Each recipient stood and received their award from Jasmine, while the audience applauded their achievements and potential. When the formal ceremony ended, Richard approached Jasmine with Patricia and Madison beside him. "Captain Washington," Richard said, using Jasmine's new title with obvious respect, "congratulations on your promotion. Your father told me you finished at the top of your pilot training class." "Thank you, Mr. Whitman," Jasmine replied with a smile. "I'm excited about this next chapter in my career." Madison, who was now a college freshman studying social justice and human rights, spoke up. "Jasmine, I wanted you to know that your example changed my entire perspective on life. I'm majoring in civil rights law because I want to fight against the kind of prejudice my family showed you." Jasmine was touched by Madison's words and personal growth. "That's wonderful, Madison. The world needs more advocates for justice and equality." Patricia stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Jasmine, I know we can never undo what we said and did on that flight," Patricia said, "but I hope you can see that we've tried to learn from our mistakes and become better people." "I can see that," Jasmine replied warmly, "and I'm grateful that something positive came from such a difficult experience." Dr. Washington joined the group, having just finished speaking with some of the scholarship recipients and their families. "How did the interviews go, Dad?" Jasmine asked. "Excellent," Dr. Washington replied. "These young people are incredibly impressive. They're going to make significant contributions to their fields." Richard looked at Dr. Washington with deep respect and gratitude. "Dr. Washington, I can never thank you enough for saving my life and for helping my family understand how to be better people," Richard said. "Working with you this past year has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my life." Dr. Washington smiled and shook Richard's hand. "Richard, you've shown that people can change when they're willing to confront their biases and work toward understanding. That takes courage and humility." As the evening wound down, Jasmine found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed since that difficult flight. The harassment she had experienced had been painful, but it had also led to opportunities and relationships she never could have imagined. She had been promoted to captain ahead of schedule, partly because of the recognition she received for her professional handling of the in-flight incident. She had become a spokesperson for diversity in aviation and had been invited to speak at conferences around the country. Most importantly, she had helped create a scholarship program that would provide opportunities for hundreds of young people over the years to come. "Jasmine," a voice called out from behind her. She turned to see Maria Santos, one of the scholarship recipients, approaching with excitement. "I just wanted to thank you again," Maria said. "This scholarship means everything to me. I'm going to be the first person in my family to go to college, and now I'm going to learn to fly airplanes." Jasmine smiled and hugged the young woman. "You earned this opportunity, Maria. Work hard, stay focused, and don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong in the cockpit." "I won't," Maria promised. "And someday, when I'm a captain like you, I want to help other young people achieve their dreams too." As the ceremony concluded and people began to leave, Jasmine and her father stood together, watching the scholarship recipients talking excitedly with their families about their futures. "Are you proud of how this all turned out?" Dr. Washington asked his daughter. "I am," Jasmine replied. "I'm proud that we turned something negative into something positive. I'm proud that the Whitman family chose to learn and grow instead of staying stuck in their prejudices. And I'm proud that we're helping these young people pursue their dreams." Dr. Washington put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become," he said, referring to Jasmine's mother, who had passed away when Jasmine was in college. "She always said that the best way to respond to injustice was to work for positive change. I learned that from both of you," Jasmine said. "You taught me to treat all people with dignity, to work hard for what I want, and to use my success to help others." The Whitman family approached them one final time before leaving. "Jasmine, Dr. Washington," Richard said, "thank you for this incredible evening. Seeing these young people receive their scholarships and hearing their stories has been inspiring." "Thank you for making it possible," Jasmine replied. "Your commitment to funding these scholarships is changing lives." Madison stepped forward with a shy smile. "Jasmine, I hope it's okay if I stay in touch with you. I'd love to learn more about your work in aviation and maybe volunteer with the scholarship program." "I'd like that very much," Jasmine said, handing Madison her business card. "I'm always happy to mentor young people who are passionate about making a difference." As the families said their goodbyes and began to leave the convention center, Dr. Washington and Jasmine walked out together into the cool Denver evening. "Dad," Jasmine said as they reached their car, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been on that flight?" Dr. Washington considered the question seriously. "I think everything happened exactly as it was supposed to," he said finally. "You handled that difficult situation with grace and professionalism. Richard learned a valuable lesson about the consequences of his behavior, and together we all created something positive that will help young people for years to come." Jasmine nodded, feeling grateful for the way events had unfolded. "Sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the foundation for the best things that happen to us," she said. "That's true," Dr. Washington agreed, "but only when we choose to respond to challenges with dignity, compassion, and a commitment to making things better." As they drove through the city, Jasmine thought about the 20 scholarship recipients who were now heading home with the resources they needed to pursue their dreams. She thought about Madison Whitman, who had chosen to dedicate her life to fighting injustice. She thought about her own career advancement and the opportunities she now had to make a difference in the aviation industry. Most of all, she thought about the power of forgiveness, education, and second chances to transform even the most difficult situations into opportunities for positive change. The incident on Flight 447 had started with hatred and prejudice, but it had ended with understanding, respect, and a commitment to helping others succeed. It was proof that even in the face of racism and discrimination, people could choose to respond with grace, dignity, and hope for a better future. And as Captain Jasmine Washington prepared for her next flight the following morning, she carried with her the knowledge that she was not just transporting passengers from one destination to another, but also serving as an example of excellence, professionalism, and the power of treating all people with the respect and dignity they deserved. The legacy of Flight 447 would continue to inspire positive change for generations to come, one scholarship recipient, one conversation, and one act of kindness at a time.